taking shots at the enemy.
California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom has signed a bill that makes changes to a controversial law. The state law leaves it up to a judge's discretion on whether or not to add individuals to the state's sex offender registry who have committed sodomy with minors.
Yes, this is related to SB 145, that's Senate Bill 145. It was authored by State Senator Scott Wiener from the San Francisco area. He is also the chair of California's LGBT caucus. This bill was actually introduced in 2019, and it passed through the Assembly and the Senate fairly quickly, but then it hit a roadblock in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. In fact, the chairwoman of that committee, Lorena Gonzalez, a strong Democrat but also Catholic and a mother, raised significant concerns about the dangers of lowering any protections on prohibitions between adults and minors. As a result, she was able to actually stop this bill for 13 months. It arrived in her committee July 2019. It was finally forced out of the committee over her strenuous objections in August. And Governor Newsom, as you noted, just actually signed it into law last Friday, September 11th. Essentially, what this bill does is it actually lowers the mandatory requirements that an individual within 10 years of a minor who engages in sexual activity with someone is automatically placed on the state's sex offender registry. Now, already there were some would call it a loophole that allowed for judges to have the discretion if it was heterosexual encounters. In this case, as you mentioned, sodomy, oral sex, other types of activities are now subject to that same deference. To put it in plain terms, this means that a 24-year-old who seduces and engages in this type of sexual activity with a 14-year-old would no longer be required to immediately go on the sex offender registry. Unfortunately, I think all of us in our lives have people who are members of the LGBT community that we're friends with. I think many of them would actually raise significant concerns about this bill as well. But the way this bill was sold at every step along the way was equality. It was removing discrimination from LGBT young people, when in reality, I'm sorry, I don't care whether it is heterosexual, homosexual, binary, bisexual. I don't think that any 24-year-old should ever be having sexual interaction with a 14-year-old. That's just wrong.
This month, the city of San Francisco passed a new law banning police from storing DNA obtained from rape kits and other crimes in city-run databases for more than 60 days. This comes after it was found that San Francisco police used a sexual assault victim's DNA against her in an unrelated property crime case.
There's nothing more important to me in my office than being able to hold people who commit crimes accountable. And we can't do that if victims don't report crime, if they don't trust us to cooperate with our prosecutions. And these kinds of practices are not only illegal, but they also serve as very serious deterrents to victims coming forward and cooperating with law enforcement.
SFPD have since stopped that practice, and now there's a nationwide movement to introduce similar bans at crime labs across the country. Joining me now is State Senator Scott Wiener, who is spearheading the effort in California. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator.
Thanks for having me.
So, what was your reaction when you first heard that crime investigators were using rape kit DNA in this way?
I was completely dumbfounded. I think we all assumed that if a sexual assault survivor comes forward and goes through the very, very traumatic event of going to the hospital after you've been assaulted and providing DNA, which is a very intrusive exam, that if you did that would only be used to solve that crime and not be used against that survivor in the future. So it's horrifying, and we need to stop it.
How widespread do you think this issue is in the state of California?
We don't know. San Francisco is the only location or the only department where we know that the police have been doing this. We don't know if it's happened elsewhere, but regardless, this showed a huge loophole in the law, and we need to just make clear that this is banned. That if you are sexually assaulted and you make the brave choice to come forward, to report the crime, to go to the hospital, to provide a DNA sample, that sample will not be used against you in the future.
You joined together with San Francisco DA Chesa Boudin and Assemblymember Phil Ting to introduce new legislation addressing this issue. Can you walk us through some of the highlights of this proposed bill?
Sure, it's a very straightforward bill. It's Senate Bill 1228, and it will statewide prohibit the use of this DNA, of rape kit DNA, for any purpose other than to solve that sexual assault. And it will not allow police departments to retain the DNA in databases that are used to solve crimes generally.
Have you had any conversations with other, say, police departments in the state or even sexual assault victims as you were working to put this legislation together, and what's their response been? Well,
we are working with organizations that represent and work with sexual assault survivors, and they're very supportive of the legislation. In addition, after this happened, various police departments came to me because they knew that I was working on it, and they said, hey, we want you to know that we don't do this. Again, this situation exposed a loophole, a very dangerous loophole that we need to close.
We're going to talk about something extremely important, about a law change that has to do with people that have been required to register for many, many, many years as a sex offender. And this is something that we've been helping people with, because obviously being a registered sex offender all but destroys your life.
It used to be, if you're convicted of certain sex crimes, and it could be anything, it could be indecent exposure, it could be multiple rapes. Everyone registers for the rest of their life. Their name goes on a website for the world to see. Well, the government felt, the state legislature felt that this is getting crazy, that not everyone should be registering for the rest of their life.
It used to be that in California, sex offenders would register for a lifetime, whether it was a misdemeanor sex offense or felony. Now there's a 3-tier system where registration in Tier 1 is 10 years, Tier 2 20 years, and then Tier 3 is lifetime, only Tier 3. Why did they do that? Well, because there's 105,000 people currently registered as sex offenders. That's 1 in every 400 Americans. That's a lot of people. It's hard to administer. They have to register every year on their birthday or every month if they're homeless. And a lot of these people, they've been registering since the 1940s or 50s. I think there's 3,000 of those, or the 60s and 70s, and other thousands of those. There's 81,000 people in Tier 1 that would qualify for Tier 1 today. What are Tier 1 offenses? They're misdemeanor sexual offenses. For example, sexual battery, grabbing someone's butt without their permission. You before you had to register for lifetime. Now, after 10 years, you could get that taken off. You have to actively go to the court. You have to hire me. I'll go to the court and petition the judge to take you off. It's up to the judge ultimately, but why not? He should take you off after 10 years. Tier 2, 20 years, those are kind of intermediate crimes or felonies. For example, a special kind of rape, like if somebody is incapable, they're too drunk to give consent and you have sex, that's a certain special type of rape. That's 20 years. After 20 years, you can be taken off the registry. And then Tier 3 are the very serious violent crimes that involve force, for example, child molestation. Those are still lifetime. How many of those are more than 10 years old? Maybe half, let's say 40,000. I should have 40,000 clients right now. Call me if you are on that registry and you want to get off.